Welcome to Swanson Reed's presentation on AusIndustry's software sector guidance and their recently published hypothetical machine learning case study. The applicability of Australian R&D tax incentive to software development activity has been a widely discussed topic over recent years, and there have been some high-profile disputes on eligibility reported in the media and decided by the AAT. This has led to a misconception that software development activities are not eligible under the R&D tax incentive, which is not true. In fact, this presentation is based on publications from AusIndustry, the government department which regulates the eligibility of R&D activities. However, companies registering software development activities under the R&D tax incentive must take care to assess carefully, particularly in respect of ensuring they can show the activities generate new technical knowledge and are not merely an application of existing knowledge to a company's commercial or functional requirements. This general principle of assessing software eligibility remains relevant to activities involving artificial intelligence and machine learning, which are becoming an increasing focus of the software industry and thus software R&D claims. Within this presentation, we will discuss the software sector guidance at a high level, including core R&D activities, including determining technical unknown outcomes, experimentation, and generating new knowledge, supporting activities, overseas activities, and substantiation requirements. We will then discuss AusIndustry's recent hypothetical machine learning case study, which was last updated in September 2024. Links to the guidance document and case study can be found below. Additional links that may be of assistance can also be found in the video description. The legislation defines core R&D activities as activities whose outcome cannot be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, or experience, but can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work that is based on principles of established science and proceeds from hypothesis to experiment, observation, and evaluation, and leads to logical conclusions, and are conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge, including new knowledge in the form of new or improved materials, products, devices, processes, or services. This means that a core activity must demonstrate the following: unknown outcomes, a systematic progression of work, and the intention to generate new knowledge. The guidance outlines that before you start your activity, you must establish that it has an unknown outcome based on current knowledge, information, or experience. Companies are expected to search widely for current knowledge, information, or experience, and keep records to show how they did this search. AusIndustry may ask for evidence of this search for knowledge if they conduct a review or examination of the activity's eligibility. The identified unknown outcome being investigated must be a technical unknown, not a business or commercial unknown. For example, whether an objective is scientifically or technologically possible, or whether existing knowledge or capability can be adapted to solve a problem. The typical test AusIndustry will apply when assessing whether an unknown is valid for the purposes of R&D tax incentive eligibility is whether a competent professional, i.e. a person who has knowledge, skills, and expertise in the field that relates to the R&D, could have known or determined the outcome of the core activity based on knowledge, information, or experience that is publicly available or reasonably accessible anywhere in the world, and without carrying out a systematic progression of work, which takes us to the second point of the eligibility criteria. The company may use software development methods such as Agile, Waterfall, or Rapid. Regardless of the method used, the company will need to show that the methodologies were used as part of a systematic progression of work. A systematic progression of work is defined as the hypothesis to be tested, the design and setup of experiments, including key variables to be tested, observation and evaluation of results, leading to logical conclusions. A hypothesis should be an explanatory statement that can be proven or disproven via the conduct of an experiment and should relate to a specific technical or scientific uncertainty or a set of related knowledge gaps being tested by an experiment. An example hypothesis from the current Farside example on the AusIndustry website is: our hypothesis was that we could build a new mathematical and statistical framework for 3D patch generation to achieve a smooth and continuous graphic visualization of an entire planet surface from a limited selection of known 3D patches. Experiments are a set of tests undertaken to evaluate the hypothesis. Observations should be recorded using qualitative, i.e. descriptive information, or quantitative, i.e. numerical data, and results of experiments should be evaluated. Logical conclusions should be drawn from the above. A failed or abandoned experiment may still be eligible. The guidance outlines that to be eligible as core R&D activity, companies need to show the activity is carried out to generate new knowledge. New knowledge is knowledge that did not already exist or is not publicly available or reasonably accessible from anywhere in the world, for example, a trade secret. Typically with software claims, this comes in the form of new or improved technology, for example, algorithms or engines, or new or improved processes involving software. Companies should be mindful that the knowledge generated should be new to the world or not available to a competent software developer, not knowledge that is just new to the organisation conducting the research. And new knowledge for a software development project would be expected to be dependent on a scientific and/or technological advance. Supporting activities are those which do not meet core activity eligibility criteria, but that have a direct, close, or relatively immediate relationship with one or more core activity. It is not enough for the activity to simply be part of the same project. It must be directly related to a core activity. For example, setting up test beds, coding algorithms that will be used in an experiment, or collating a data sample that will be used to conduct a relevant experiment. The guidance also provides examples of activities that are explicitly excluded from being considered core activities, but that may be supporting activities, including developing, modifying, or customizing software for internal administration, including the internal administration of business functions. Another important thing to note is the location or resources engaged to undertake R&D activities. Australian companies will commonly engage overseas-based software developers to work on a project, and often these offshore resources are engaged for reasons of cost. In such cases, the overseas-based development is not likely to qualify under the R&D tax incentive. In situations where a company seeks to include the cost of overseas-based development within their claims, companies must attain a pre-approval to claim the cost of overseas activity via a separate overseas finding application to demonstrate the following. Their proposed overseas activity is eligible under the general criteria. There is a significant scientific link between the proposed overseas activity and an Australian core activity. The overseas activity must not be able to be conducted in Australia for specified issues, including lack of availability to expertise and resources within Australia. And the costs for overseas R&D activities must be less than the costs of related R&D activities undertaken solely in Australia. Attaining an overseas finding can be a very involved process and often requires significant time and evidence. Companies need to keep records or documentation relating to the activities they have carried out. These can include internal records such as screenshots, instant messaging histories, and exported content from task tracking or project management tools. More formal examples include literature reviews, email exchanges with industry experts, screenshots of questions posted on tech blogs or forums, details of failed attempts to use existing technology, and code repositories of software versions. An increasing amount of software development activity in recent years focused on artificial intelligence or machine learning, which in turn is leading to more R&D claims involving machine learning. This likely led AusIndustry to release new guidance, being a hypothetical machine learning case study in September 2024. The hypothetical case study shows how entities using machine learning techniques can assess their activities for the R&D tax incentive program. In the guidance, a hypothetical company provides digital tools to the agriculture sector using its expertise in predictive algorithm development and machine learning. Its current irrigation decision support system uses field sensors to detect soil moisture, which an algorithm then combines with separately stored weather data to generate information about a crop's expected demand for water. However, customers have reported that the IDSS does not always accurately correlate weather with soil moisture prediction. So, the company aims to include satellite hyperspectral and imaging data to increase the accuracy of the IDSS in predicting soil moisture. The company conducts online research and identifies similar soil moisture prediction projects, their machine learning models, training and testing methods, and results. The company's review of the information found that researchers have discovered that some weather variables are ranking as unimportant when predicting soil moisture. A recent article proposes that the machine learning models are producing false negative errors because the model misses the real importance of the weather variables for predicting soil moisture. The company decides it needs to solve the variable ranking error. A second online review does not find any follow-up research that tested the idea about false negatives to know how to effectively use weather variables for predicting soil moisture. The company proposes that it will identify the most useful variables if it filters weather variables without relying so heavily on assumptions about which have the greatest relevance to soil moisture. Their background research identifies a variable relevance framework that might be able to accurately describe the relationship between weather variables and soil moisture, without relying on assumptions about their interactions. The machine learning model development starts with acquiring data to train and test its random forest regression machine learning models. The company uses the new filter framework and current knowledge about soil properties and hydrology to select the variables most likely to predict soil moisture. After finalizing its training and validation datasets, the company tunes the hyperparameters for the machine learning algorithm used to train the soil moisture predictive model. The tuning uses a basic dataset to establish benchmarks for both the experiment and the train model. The hypothesis being tested as part of the R&D was documented. The guidance notes that it is hypothesized that applying a variable relevance framework to the dataset will create a machine learning model which accurately identifies which satellite imagery data and weather variables correlate to predict soil moisture. The company runs its experiments with the variable relevance framework while training the machine learning model. The experiments involve iterations of training the algorithm on datasets with different selected variables and testing the resulting model for accuracy. The results of the experiments are captured and then evaluated to understand why or how variables are relevant to accurately predicting soil moisture. The analysis allows the company to draw logical conclusions about the results of its experiments. The company keeps information about its IDSS research while undertaking its activities, including documented discussions about its intent to undertake the activities and why, results from its online background research, including article links, as well as the discussions or notes about the information found, plans for how it will run the experiments, including the hypothesis, the results of all experimental runs, and analysis of the results. The company also keeps records for each financial transaction and activity related to its research, and ensures that the expenditure can be linked to its activities. These include timesheets to cost when staff were engaged in particular IDSS research activities, and invoices with notes about where or how equipment, software, and services are used. Now, let's have a look at this example against the criteria. Firstly, the unknown outcome. The outcome of applying its chosen machine learning training method to the satellite imagery and weather data was not known and could not be determined in advance from current knowledge, information, and experience. Online reviews conducted by staff with expertise in the field could not identify any publicly available research into the combination of variables that may cause false negatives, nor how to evaluate and select weather variables with the strongest relationship to soil moisture. Next, the systematic progression of work. Without current knowledge and with no way to determine the outcome from observing how existing decision systems work, the outcome can only be determined from an experiment. The company develops a hypothesis based on using a new variable relevance framework, tested the hypothesis in an experiment, captured and evaluated observations, and drew logical conclusions from the analysis. In respect of the new knowledge, the company conducted the activity to generate new knowledge about an improved IDSS, why weather variables rank as important, and how to filter these to better predict soil moisture. Hence, the company self-assesses that it can register this experiment as a core R&D activity. This case study highlights the expectation of investigation of current methods, i.e. the example highlights an instance where models exist but are not accurate. Whilst AI is a relatively new and developing field, companies need to be careful not to assume that projects involving AI will automatically qualify under the R&D tax incentive, in the same way that companies undertaking software development activities are not necessarily automatically eligible. Eligibility of companies' R&D activities will come down to assessment of the activities and their underlying supporting documentation against the law. It's important to remember that although a company's circumstances may appear similar to this case study, their activities may not be eligible. Companies should assess their activities thoroughly in accordance with the legislation and AusIndustry guidance documentation. It's also worth noting that as the fields of AI and machine learning are rapidly evolving, the volume of publicly available information in these fields is also rapidly changing. This impacts what may be considered new knowledge for a given activity. For this reason, it will be important for companies to document the sources investigated for R&D activities in these fields in order to explain what process and evidence led them to determine that the state of existing knowledge and unknown outcomes relevant to their experience. The sources investigated should be clearly documented prior to the conduct of experiments. We also expect that AusIndustry may release additional guidance on assessment of R&D activities for AI and machine learning related projects in the future, so it will be important to keep up to date with information published by the regulators. That concludes the presentation of AusIndustry's software sector guidance and their new hypothetical machine learning case study. If you have any questions about this presentation, please contact our office. Thanks for watching.